Hello, fellow Planeswalkers, it's Scott, and today is the first day of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoiler season. So we've got a lot of cards to talk about and the new mechanics of the set to get into. But before we do that, special thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring these videos. And remember to like and subscribe to get further spoilers videos throughout the Lost Caverns of Ixalan preview season. Let's get started. So we start with our Planeswalker from the set, and that's Quintarius Khand, who's 3 and a red and a white mana. You get a legendary Planeswalker with 4 loyalty. And whenever you cast a spell from exile, Quintarius Khand deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you gain 2 life. For his +1 ability is create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token, and for -3 you get to discover 4. And discover is cascade, but it's a fixed cascade. You're going to reveal cards from the top of your deck until you hit a spell that is 4 mana or less. And then you'll get to play that spell immediately. So, it's possible you play Quint on turn 5, you -3 to discover, and you might even get another 4-cost spell that you immediately get to play on top of that. So it's kind of there's a little bit of a gamble there. But no matter what, Quint is going to be a Planeswalker I believe we're going to see in Standard in the coming season because it fits well into a number of decks. So we've already got an adventure deck that we're seeing have the ability to see play in Standard already. And then we've got the Pia Nilar deck that's a Boros deck as it is currently. And it's playing a lot of cards from exile, which means you're going to activate Quint's ability often, and maybe playing it and then getting 3 or 4 activations might be all you need to win a game. And I think that is a very, very powerful ability in Standard. And when we really haven't seen like this, to my knowledge before, where just casting spells from exile gains you 2 life and causes your opponent to lose 2 life. Now, he also has a -6 if you need it. You can exile any number of target cards from your graveyard, and you get to add red mana for each card exiled this way, and you may play those cards this turn. So when you activate Quint's ability, as long as you are keeping him on the battlefield, then when you play those cards from exile, you're going to get the advantage of 2 damage to your opponent, and you gain 2 life. So I think, Quint is going to be a Planeswalker we're going to see throughout the next several years because that powerful static ability is one that I know people are going to want to try and use. Next thing we want to talk about today is the Restless Prairie. So what we found out today was we're going to get the rest of the Restless creature lands in the set, and this is our first one. And when it enters battlefield, it's going to be tapped, and you can tap it for either green or white mana. And for 2, a green and a white mana, Restless Prairie will become a 3/3 green and white llama creature until the end of turn. It's still a land. And whenever Restless Prairie attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 until the end of turn. So I think where Restless Prairie will shine is in go wide creature decks. And when you attack with this, you're giving all of your creatures a boost, and that boost probably will be enough to either put your opponent out of the game or fairly close. So I think we'll see this played in those kinds of decks in Standard. All right, next we have the Caves of Ixalan. Okay, the set is the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, so it makes sense that we're going to get caves as part of it. And these are common lands from the set, and they're the Hidden Necropolis, Hidden Cataract, Hidden Nursery, Hidden Volcano, and Hidden Courtyard. And each of them will add a mana of their chosen color, and then for 5 mana you can sacrifice Hidden Necropolis or any of the other ones, and you discover 4. And you get that ability, which I think is a really nice ability in Standard right now to go ahead and, in essence, go ahead and look for, you get to exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with mana value 4 or less, cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So if you get like a counter spell that comes up, well, you're not going to cast that right then. You can put that in your hand. So I think that flexibility is also nice with these cards. And I think we're going to see a deck that probably will be built around caves based on what they had to say about them today. So next we have Geological Appraiser for 2 and 2 red mana. You get a Human Artificer, that's a 3/2. And whenever Geologist Appraiser enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you get to discover 3. Okay, we just talked about that ability. And you get to exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less, cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So this is Bloodbraid Elf, but in only one color. That saw a lot of play in Standard at one point when it was in the game. So this probably was going to see that ability as well, because for 4 mana you're getting a 3/2 and then another card, and that is a pretty powerful ability. Next we've got Ogier Talk, Deepest Foundation. For 4 and 2 white mana, you get Legendary Creature. That's a god. That's a 6/6 with Vigilance. So this is our second god from the set that we're seeing here. And if 1 or more creature tokens would be created under your control, 3 times that many of those tokens are created. You know, that's a bonkers ability. So if you can play this in a go wide tokens deck, it goes into play. You're creating tokens, and we've got so many different token generators already in Standard that I can see this having no problem finding a home. And then when Ogier Talk dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control. And then you get the Temple of Civilization. It's a land, and you get to add white mana to your mana pool. And for 2 and a white, you can transform Temple of Civilization, activate only if you attack with 3 or more creatures this turn, and only as a sorcery. So I can see, you know, your opponent's probably going to want to kill this pretty quickly because they don't want you to create 3 times the amount of creature tokens that you're going to be generating. But the nice thing about this is that you can bring it back as a creature anytime by just going ahead and attacking with 3 creatures. Then in your second main phase, you go ahead and transform it back into Ogier Talk, and then any creature tokens you be generating after that would be getting that bonus. And I think that is a pretty powerful ability in Standard. Next, we've got the Enigmatic Jewel. For a blue mana, you get a legendary artifact, and the Enigmatic Jewel enters the battlefield tapped, like many cards from Ixalan seem to be doing, but you can tap it to add 2 colorless mana and spend this mana only to activate abilities. So I think this is going to see a lot of play simply because with the cards that are previewed today, and I think what we'll see from the set and what we already have in Standard, there's a lot of activated abilities. So for 1 mana, you can play this on turn 1, you know, untap it on turn 2, and then you've got extra mana to spend on activated abilities. And that could even be activated abilities of your land to turn them into creatures. And now all of a sudden, instead of costing 4 mana, now they cost 2 mana. And that means you can do a lot more with them in Standard. Now, it also has a craft ability, and you can craft with 4 or more non-lands with activated abilities for 8 and a blue mana. You can exile this card and exile the 4 or more from among other permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard. Return this card transformed under its owner's control. Again, craft only as a sorcery. So when you do this, most likely in the very late game, then you get Locus of Enlightenment. And Locus of Enlightenment has each ability of the exile cards used to craft it. So the activated abilities of any cards that were used to craft it, it all of a sudden has. And you may activate each of those abilities only once per turn. So once each turn, the 4 cards that you are exiling, or more potentially, you can activate each of those abilities. And when you activate an ability that isn't a mana ability, you get to copy it, which is a very good thing in Standard. So you're doubling your abilities when you activate them. So it could be draw a card, you get to double that ability. by drawing, and you just draw 2 cards, and that's pretty powerful. So I'm not sure where this fits into standard right now, but somebody's going to find a way to abuse this, because I think it will be definitely something that is abusable in standard. Next, we've got Bringer of the Last Gift for 6 and 2 black mana. You get a Vampire Demon. That's a 6/6 with flying. And when Bringer of the Last Gift enters the battlefield, if you cast it, each player sacrifices all other creatures they control. Then each player returns all creature cards from their graveyard that weren't put there this way to the battlefield. So this is a very, very interesting 8 mana spell. So it gives you a 6/6 creature with flying, which is great. But what it also does is, if you're playing a deck, it's probably a creature-based deck, where you've lost creatures over the course of the game, this is a way to get all of those creatures back and wipe out your opponent's board. And you are going to give up stuff on your side as well, but that's an ability that might be worth playing. But this is one of those, either what I would say is kind of a win more card, because when you're doing that, when you're in that position, you're probably in a pretty good position already, if that's the case. Next, we have Souls of the Lost. For 1 and a black mana, you get a creature that's a spirit. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. And it has Fathomless Descent. Descent is a new ability from the set, and Descent is something that cares about your graveyard and what's in your graveyard. So Soul of the Lost power is equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. So it will survive if you don't have anything in your graveyard. So you can actually cast this on turn 2 and then fill your graveyard from there. And I like that aspect of it, that it's not going to automatically kill itself like some of these cards that we've seen would do. Now, this is another Tarmogoyf, and already there's a pretty decent graveyard deck out there, and this is just another creature to add on top of that. And my belief is that that deck is going to just be more and more powerful, and we're going to see another card later in the previews that's going to help accelerate that as well. Next, we've got Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel. He costs 1 and a blue mana. You get a legendary creature that's a Siren Pirate. That's a 2/1. Malcolm has flash and flying, and whenever Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel, deals combat damage to a player, put a chorus counter on it. Draw a card, then discard a card. So, a very nice ability. Every turn you attack, you can draw a card, discard a card, so you're card filtering for what you need in that particular matchup. And if there are 4 or more chorus counters on Malcolm, you may cast the discarded card without paying its mana cost. So a really powerful ability if you can get those 4 chorus counters on Malcolm. And we do have cards that proliferate already in Standard, so I can see you getting that first chorus counter on Malcolm, and maybe a second by attacking, possibly even a third, but then using cards that are going to proliferate to get you to that 4 place, and when you attack, get that 4th one, then you're going to get to play that card as well, and that can be anything. There's no mana restrictions or anything, so that could be bonkers in a game of Magic, where you're maybe putting your 6 or 7 drop onto the field because Malcolm has attacked successfully and done damage to your opponent. So I think this card has a potential to be an all-star in Standard, but it also has a potential to fizzle because of the need to get those 4 counters on it. So as long as we can find a way to get those 4 counters, I think this is going to be a card we're going to see in Standard, certainly in a Pirates deck, if nothing else. Next, we've got the Everflowing Well. For 2 and a blue mana, you get a legendary artifact, and when the Everflowing Well enters the battlefield, you get to mill 2 cards, then draw 2 cards. It has Descend 8. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, transform the Everflowing Well. So if you got 8, then you get to activate its Descent ability, and when you do, you get the Myriad Pools, which is a legendary artifact land, and it taps for blue mana. Whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by the Myriad Pools, up to 1 other target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell until end of turn. So what this is a really interesting copy ability where you're casting a permanent using the myriad pool, and then you are taking that and making a copy of it that is going to be attached to another permanent that you control, which could lead to, you cast, a pretty dominant spell, and it has potentially, if it's a creature, you've already got that creature on the field because it's just becoming, the target is becoming a copy of it, and then you can attack with it on the turn that that card comes into play. So I think there's a lot of standard playability here. Again, it's one of those cards that I think we're going to see more of the set to really understand where it fits in standard, and it might have playability beyond that. Next we have Gishoth, Sun's Avatar. For 5, a red, a green, and a white mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a dinosaur avatar. That's a 7/6. Gishoth has Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. And whenever Gishoth, Sun's Avatar deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. Put any number of dinosaur creature cards from among them onto the battlefield, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is a reprint from the Ixalan block, and it was a powerful card then, and it has the potential to be a very powerful card now as well. And what in my mind makes it potentially even more powerful than it was then is we already have a ramp deck, and if we can find ways to utilize that ramp deck to get to that 8 mana that you need to get this onto the field, I think it will be very, very effective and very powerful. And my expectation is we're going to have a dinosaur deck in standard. Now, how strong it's going to be, that's the question, but we're definitely going to have one. And Gishoth is the top end of that deck. Next, we've got Abuelo, Ancestral Echo. For 1, a white and a blue mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a spirit. It's a 2/2. It has flying and ward too, so it can protect itself. And then it also has a nice activated ability. For 1, a white and a blue mana, you can exile another target creature or artifact you control, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So you can use a card during your turn, whether it's a creature or an artifact, you use that, and then you can bounce it and get whatever the enter the battlefield trigger was for that card, which I think for 3 mana is not too high of a price to pay for that if you've got the right build of that deck. And again, just like we were talking with Gishoth, it really is going to be about creating the right build around that particular ability. And do we have that in standard? I think we do. It's just a matter of bringing the deck together. Next, we've got the Myco Tyrant. For 1, a black and a green mana, you get a legendary creature. That's an Elder Fungus. It has Trample, and the Myco Tyrant's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control that are fungus and or saproleans. At the beginning of your end step, create X11 black fungus creature tokens with this creature cannot block, where X is the number of times you descended this turn. So this is going to be in a deck that is going to be dedicated to the descent. Now, I mentioned this, that we'd come to this card later when we talked about Soul of Lost, and I think this card may actually fit into the right kind of deck that is a graveyard deck, where we're trying to put stuff naturally in there, but its power and toughness are only going to be equal to the number that are on the field, so that may cause some problems with it. But I think this is a card that certainly has a potential to be a build around if you've got the right things in standard. And we'll see if we get fungi and or saproleans that would support this. And I think overall this is an interesting card that we'll see at least people trying to make it work in standard. Next, we've got Ushbenbach, the Great Mistake. For 3, a blue and a black mana, you get a legendary creature that's a skeleton horror. It's a 6/4. It has Vigilance and Menace. It has Descent 8. And when you descend, you pay 4 in a blue and a black mana, and you get to return Ushbenbach, the Great Mistake, from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Activate only if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard and only as a sorcery. So Ukbenbach, I mean, is an interesting card because you can discard it early in the game, later in the game when you've got 8 cards in your graveyard. Then you can pay 6 mana to bring it back when you probably have that already, or you can just hard cast it, your opponent kills it, and then you can bring it back to life later. So I like the reanimation aspect of this. Now, is it good enough to be in standard? That's going to be a question we'll have to see answered later, but certainly a good limited card if nothing else. Next we have Cosmian Confluence. For 4 in a green mana, you get a sorcery, and you get to choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. You can search your library for a cave card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. You can put 3 +1/+1 counters on a cave you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste. It's still a land. Or you can destroy a target enchantment. So the fact that you get to do 3 of these things, the worst case scenario with this is you activate the first ability to get a cave, then you can activate the second ability to put 3 +1/+1 counters on that particular cave twice. Now, is this good enough for standard? Well, if there's a dedicated cave deck, this might just be good enough for that, because it would be making potentially 2 or 3 creatures out of your caves, and that might be just what you need to win a game. Next, we've got Jadelight Spelunker. For X and a green mana, you get a Merfolk Scout. That's a 1/1. And when Jadelight Spelunker enters the battlefield, it explores X times. To have it explore, reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand if it's a land, otherwise put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, then put the card back or put it into your graveyard. So the nice thing with this is a 1/1 early in the game, or potentially a 2/2, 3/3, whatever it is when you cast it, because you can use all that mana. But in the late game, this could be a very large creature, and it can help hit your land drops as well, because you're getting to explore multiple times with this. So I think this has definite standard playability. The question is, what kind of deck is going to want that particular set of abilities? Next, we've got Hit the Motherlode. For 4 and 3 red mana, you get a sorcery, and you get to discover 10. If you discover cards mana value is less than 10, create a number of tap treasure tokens equal to the difference. So if you play Hit the Motherlode and you get a 2-drop, then you get to create 8 tapped treasures at that point, and now you've got basically the mana to do pretty much anything you want in a red deck, because you're already at 7 and now you're adding potentially 8, so pretty much anything you want to do you'll be able to do. It is a sorcery. It is going to be slow, but I can see this, particularly in maybe the ramp deck, as a one-of, as let's spin the wheel and see what happens, and if nothing else, we get a lot of treasure out of it. So is this going to be something that's going to see a lot of standard play? Probably not, but in Commander, it might just have a place there, because that ability to create treasures, if you don't discover 10, I think leads us to a place where it's got some playability. Next, we've got Vito, Fanatic of Azlazot. For 2 and a white and a black mana, you get a Vampire Demon. That's a 4/4 with flying. And whenever you sacrifice another permanent, you gain 2 life if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. If it's the second time, each opponent loses 2 life. If it's the third time, you get to create a 4/3 white and black Vampire Demon creature token with flying. So this looks to me like we're wanting to push sacrifice into white and black. Right now, the sack deck we have is a Rakdos deck, so maybe we go Mardu with it, but Vito is certainly a card that really wants to take advantage of sacrificing things in the match, and because of that, I think it's got definite standard playability. Next, we've got Saheeli, the Sun's Brilliance. For a blue and a red mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human artificer. Saheeli is a 2/2, and you can tap it for a red and a blue mana, and you get to create a token that's a copy of another target creature or artifact you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gets haste, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. So this kind of has a feel of a little bit of Fable the Mirror Breaker to it, because you could copy something during your opponent's end step, and then untap Saheeli, and then do it again, and now all of a sudden you've got 3 copies of the same card. So if you've got, a good attacker that you want to, try to finish the game with, Saheeli potentially can provide that for you. Now, is this something that's going to be highly playable in Standard? I don't know. I think this is going to require a specific build that is going to want that ability. And right now, I'm not sure whether we have that or not. But Saheeli is an interesting card when it comes to Standard playability. Next, we've got our second reprint of the day in Growing Rites of Ixalan. For 2 and a green mana, you get legendary enchantment, and when Growing Rites of Ixalan enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more creatures, you get to transform Growing Rites of Ixalan. And when you do, you get Ixalan, Cradle of the Sun, which is a legendary land and provides green mana. And you can also tap it for green mana for each creature you control. So once you've done this, you can get 4 green mana every single turn, assuming 4 creatures you control to transform it are still on the battlefield. So this is a huge mana advantage for green decks, and I can see any deck that's in green that wants to go wide and potentially, with a hasty Gruul build potentially, this could be a really nice card in that particular deck, and it has playability in a variety of decks in Standard. Anybody that really just wants to be able to play creatures and ramp because of those creatures. Next, we've got Spring-Loaded Sawblades. For 1 and a white mana, you get an artifact with flash. And when Spring-Loaded Sawblades enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to target tapped creature an opponent controls. So that flash ability means you can play it on your opponent's turn, which is great. And 5 just happens to be the toughness of Sheoldred. So if your opponent attacks you with a Sheoldred, you can Spring-Loaded Sawblades it to death and eliminate it at that point, which is a great ability. Now, it also comes with the craft ability, craft with artifact. So for 3 and a white, you can exile this artifact and exile another artifact you control or an artifact card from your graveyard and return this card transformed under its owner's control, craft only as a sorcery. So when you do that, you get Blade Wheel Chariot, which is a vehicle, and it's a 5/5. You can tap 2 other untapped artifacts you control, and Blade Wheel Chariot becomes an artifact creature until the end of turn. And again, we create blood tokens and a lot of other ancillary tokens that are artifacts from a variety of cards already in Standard. So I think getting this ability to activate will not be too difficult. And the fact that it accrues for 1 makes this really nice, because your 1/1 that can't attack anymore can now be used to crew Blade Wheel Chariot, and now you got a nice 5/5 attacker as well. So the fact that this leaves behind that 5/5 attacker potentially after killing a good card on your opponent's side when you flash it into play, I think makes this a really good card in the mid to late game when you don't have as much to do with your mana, and this is an opportunity to transform this and get a nice 5/5 attacker as a result. Next, we've got Throne of the Grim Captain. For 2 mana, you get a legendary artifact, and you can tap it to mill 2. Graveyard, we already know, because of the Descent ability, is going to be a important component of this set. So the fact that you can mill cards pretty easily with the Throne of Grim Captain allows you to do that regularly and consistently and build up things in your graveyard to meet those Descent costs, or potentially also meet your craft cost as well. And you can craft the Throne of the Grim Captain with a dinosaur, a merfolk, a pirate, and a vampire, and 4 mana. And you can exile this artifact exile the 4 from among permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard. Return this card transform under its owner's control and craft only as a sorcery. So the backside of it is a Grim Captain. But before I talk about this, let's talk about the problem here. You have to craft with a dinosaur, a merfolk, a pirate, and a vampire. That is going to be very hard to do outside of limited. So I don't think this in the end is probably got a lot of standard playability because of that. Even though the backside of it, the Grim Captain, is very powerful because you get a 7/7 that's a legendary creature, skeleton spirit pirate, menace, trample, lifelink, and hexproof. So it's going to be really hard to deal with. And whenever the Grim Captain attacks, each opponent sacrifices a non-land permanent. Then you may put an exiled creature card used to craft the Grim Captain onto the battlefield under your control, tapped and attacking. So again, if you're able to somehow meet the requirements of this, which are again are really high, then you're going to get one of those every single turn you attack with the Grim Captain to return to the battlefield to help you out. So interesting design, probably not that playable in reality and standard. Next, we've got Treasure Map, which is our third reprint from the day. And for 2 mana, you get an artifact, and if you pay 1 mana, you can scry 1, and you put a landmark counter on Treasure Map. Then if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, remove those counters, transform Treasure Map, and create 3 treasure tokens. So when you transform it, you get to create 3 treasure tokens, and then on the back, you get Treasure Cove. That's a land. It taps for colorless mana, but you can also sacrifice it then to draw a card. And the reason Treasure Map is a good card because the ability to scry was a very sought after ability when Ixalan was here the last time. So I assume that Treasure Map will continue to see play in standard because of that ability and that ability to make those 3 treasure tokens and then become a mana source for you later in the game. And if needed, you can sack it to draw a card. Next, we've got Chart a Course, which is our last card of the day. And Chart a Course is our 4th reprint from the set. And Chart a Course saw a tremendous amount of play in blue decks. And it actually was kind of the heart of the mono blue tempo deck that we saw during that time. And for 1 and a blue mana, you get a sorcery and you draw 2, then discard a card unless you attack this turn. And you were able to attack pretty consistently under these situations because you had flyers that attack through pretty consistently. And basically it's 2 mana, draw 2, and what could be better than that in standard. All right, so those are our day 1 previews from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this. And I will see you tomorrow with day 2 of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoilers. Thanks. I'll see you then.